The book of Nehemiah. Now, we had the first session behind us now. We only took 2 chapters because in chapter 2 of Nehemiah, it's pivotal from a strategic point of view in understanding your Bible, because it's the trigger, if you will, to the 70-week prophecy of Daniel. And we reviewed that last time. But that review should not be in lieu of doing a careful study of Daniel 9. One of the things you'll really want to do. But because of that, we just took 2 chapters last time. In this session 2, we're going to take chapters 3, 4, and 5 of the book of Nehemiah. Now, you should understand, by the way, I think it'll become evident as we get into the chapter, that this rebuilding of the walls, understand, Ezra's burden was to rebuild the temple. And many people get confused about that, because there were 4 different decrees, but 3 of them had to do with the temple. It's the decree that's critical from the Daniel 70-week prophecy point of view was the decree and the authority and so forth to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. And that's what the book of Nehemiah is really all about. There are spiritual issues here too, and we'll try to pick up on those. But I also want you to understand that there's a major milestone, because Gabriel told Daniel that from the authority to rebuild the city of Jerusalem, the walls, unto the Messiah the Prince, Messiah the King, I should say, the Mashiach Nagid, would be a precise number of days, and it turns out to come out to the exact day. And all that was in black and white 3 centuries before the ministry of Christ. In the Old Testament was translated into Greek 3 centuries before Christ's ministry. That is one of the most astonishing demonstrations of the deity of Jesus Christ. You say you can't prove the Bible. Yes, you can. You can prove the Bible, and that's one of the ways to do it. To establish that it was a part of the Old Testament in black and white, so to speak, 3 centuries before the fact, and discover it comes out the exact day. It's one of 300 details of Christ's ministry. But the prediction, the exact day that he would present himself deliberately, riding a donkey, as a king to Jerusalem, fulfilling Zechariah 9:9 and so on, is astonishing proof, if you will, and evidence of the reality of God's Word being what it is. It's supernatural, and it's all about Jesus Christ. But as we go on here, you should realize that Nehemiah's task that's before him is a very ambitious effort. He's going to operate under very adverse conditions, and we're going to look at the different conditions, the external conditions, the internal conditions, and the attacks on him personally. You're going to see as we get into this chapter, he assigned everybody specific work. And it seems that he assigned a lot of this to make it convenient to where people were living. As you'll watch, you'll see expressions like next to him, next to them, and so forth. Some of these were near people's houses. Some of these people building the temple were commuters from some distance, and we'll take a quick glimpse at some of that. And he also does it by vocation. But just to give you a little bit of review, they returned from the Babylonian captivity initially in 538 BC under Zerubbabel. Almost 50,000 came then. And it's 23 years later that the temple is finally rebuilt. And it's 57 years after that Ezra brings another 2,000. But the book of Ezra, of course, deals with this whole period. The book of Esther, which we don't tackle, but just for your own perspective here, occurs right in the middle, probably between about chapters 6 and 7 of the book of Ezra. And again, it's a drama within the Persian Empire, a plot that was hatched to try to wipe out all Jews, and that God uses Esther to thwart. But we're now in the book of Nehemiah, 13 years after the 2000 under Ezra, and the main thing he's equipped with is authority. He's very different than Ezra in that regard. He is able to come with hard authority from the king himself, and that's his major difference. All this occurs from Nehemiah 2 on in the degree of Artaxerxes Longimanus, who was the successor to Xerxes, who was the king of the days of Esther and so on. But so we're in Nehemiah chapter 3 tonight, verse 1. Eliashib the high priest rose up with his brethren, the priests, and they builded the sheep gate. They sanctified it, set up the doors of it, even unto the tower of Mia. The word Mia means 100, by the way, but anyway. And they sanctified it unto the tower of Hananiel. And next unto him builded the men of Jericho, and next to them builded Zachar the son of Imri. I want you to notice that word Jericho. Jericho is 20 miles to the east, and yet there are people there that are helping from Jericho. Here is a map of the area. The red lines are the traditional sites subsequently, if you will, but the blue lines are the wall that we're dealing with in Nehemiah's time. There are 11 gates and 4 towers that are mentioned in this chapter. The Sheep Gate, the Tower of Mia, the Tower of 100, and the Tower of Hananeel are up in the north side, as is the Fish Gate. And just going around counterclockwise, we come to the Old Gate, the Jeshana Gate, and the Tower of the Oven, as it's sometimes called, probably because there's bakery at the base of it or what have you. The Valley Gate, and that's where Nehemiah started his search. When he came there the first time, he came out at midnight. He made the rounds of the city secretly to assess the situation. And the Dung Gate and the Fountain Gate being at the south end of the enclosure. The Pool of Siloam being just inside the Fountain Gate. And the Water Gate, which is right near the Gihon Spring, and Hezekiah's tunnel connects it to the Pool of Siloam. And then we have the great projecting tower, the Horse Gate, the East Gate, inspection, finishing the circle, if you will. And of the 11 gates, 6 of them were repaired expressly in this chapter that we'll encounter as we move along. So we'll glimpse at this from time to time to sort of get a feeling for what's happening. But it's interesting how Nehemiah really had attention to detail. He's a great planner, but he also is a good executor. He dealt with a detailed geography, assigning everybody specifically what they should do, in some cases near their houses, in some cases for the commuters. And also you'll see the vocational issues. The priests were assigned those things that were closest to the temple. The apothecaries, the Levites, the merchants all had specific assignments. We'll see that as we go through. It's interesting that we think of this as obviously occurring in Jerusalem, but we have Jericho, Mizpah, Gibeon, and Tekoa as cities that are around there by some distance, actually, that are the location where some of the workers came a long way. They were commuters to work in the project. But moving on, verse 3, but the Fish Gate did the sons of Hassenaah build, who also laid the beams thereof, and set up the doors thereof, the locks thereof, and the bars thereof. And next unto them repaired the Meremoth, the son of Urijah, the son of Koz. And next to them repaired Meshullam, the son of Berechiah, the son of Meshezabeel. And next unto them repaired Zadok, the son of Bana. Now, we have a priest's son here who worked on the second section, and Meshullam's daughter is married to Tobiah's son. We're going to hear a lot about Tobiah. That's going to be a major part, especially in chapter 6. But let's keep moving here. There's the Fish Gate that was referenced. Again, we're moving counterclockwise from the top up there. And next unto them came the Tekoites, repaired, the people from Tekoa, if you will. Remember, Tekoa was the hometown of Amos, you may recall. Amos chapter 1, verse 1. It was about 12 miles south of Jerusalem. They didn't have cars, so that's a long walk to come to work every day. And yet the nobles here didn't help, but they'll be talked about later, about verse 27 of this chapter. Okay, and moreover the old gate repaired Jehoiada, the son of Basiah, and Meshullam, the son of Bosediah. You can mispronounce these better than I can. We'll just keep going. They laid the beams thereof, and set up the doors thereof, and the locks thereof, and the bars thereof. Establishing the doors to the gates, that's part of the getting themselves some security from their enemies and so forth. And we're going to talk about the old gate. Did we get the, let's see. Verse 6 referenced the oil gate, and that again, we're just moving counterclockwise, if I will, down the western portion of the wall there. Okay, and next to them repaired Melatiah, the Gibeonite. Now, Gibeon again is about some miles north of Jerusalem, northwest of Jerusalem. And Hadon, the Meronothite, the men of Gibeon and of Mizpah unto the throne of the governor on this side of the river. Mizpah is also up there by Gibeon, not far away. So these are all small towns, settlements that are substantially north of the city of Jerusalem. In verse 8, next unto him repaired Uzziel, the son of Hariah, of the goldsmiths. And those goldsmiths is a vocation, not his New York name. I just throw that Next unto him also repaired Hananiah, the son of one of the apothecaries, or perfume makers, if you will, and they fortified Jerusalem unto the broad wall. And the broad wall is, now by the way, I should mention, I constructed these maps from some of the commentaries, but I have to, it's pretty obvious that a lot of these locations are not precisely known. A few of them are, but some of them are conjectural as they try to infer from various writings where these things were. So just understand that there are some different, a lot of this is built on conjectures. Okay, in verse 9, and next unto them repaired Rephaiah, the son of Hur, and the ruler of the half part of Jerusalem. Next unto them repaired Jedediah, the son of Harumaph, even over against his house, and next unto him repaired Hattush, the son of Hashabaniah. Malachi, the son of Harim, and Hashab, the son of Pahath Moab, repaired the other piece, and the tower of the furnaces. And next unto him repaired Shallum, the son of Halalesh, the ruler of the half part of Jerusalem, he and his daughters. The valley gate repaired Hanam and the inhabitants of Zanoah. They built it and set up the doors thereof, the locks thereof, and the bars thereof, and 1,000 cubits on the wall unto the dung gate. So if you look at the valley gate, as you go, we're again going down, if you will, going southernly along the western wall. The Tower of the Oven, the valley gate, right on down to the dung gate, which is the southern tip. Just in the dung gate, still there. We think we know where that is. But the dung gate is, in effect, opens to the valley of Hinnom, and which is a dump and smoldering all the time, which gave rise to the linguistic term Gehenna, which is the term Jesus used of the lake that burns with fire and brimstone, speaking of an eternal situation, a very different situation, but that's where the vocabulary comes from. And just outside that tip to the west is the fountain gate, as it's called, and north of it the water gate. And not shown on the map is the Gihon Spring and the underground tunnel that Hezekiah had built before the Babylonian captivity that fed the pool of Siloam and so on. And so, okay, that gives you a rough picture. The valley gate's what we're talking about at this point. But the dung gate repaired Malchiah, the son of Rechab, the ruler of the part of Beth Hakkerem. He built it and set up the doors thereof, the locks thereof, the bars thereof. But the gate of the fountain repaired Shallum, the son of Calhose, the ruler of the part of Mizpah. In other words, the town of Mizpah is up north, but he is apparently one of the rulers that is here, and he's got his sleeves rolled up working. That's sort of the point here. You and I obviously don't have a lot of equity to try to understand which families did what, except just take note of the fact that most of these people had other vocations, other professionals, but here they have their sleeves rolled up working on the project of rebuilding the walls. Anyway, he built it, he covered it, set up the doors thereof, the locks thereof, the bars thereof, and the wall of the pool of Siloam by the king's garden, and unto the stairs that go down from the city of David. Now, the city of David is south of all this. The city of David is the part that David got from the Jebusites, sometimes called Ophel. But, so again, we've been talking about the southern part there. Okay. Verse 16, after him repaired Nehemiah, the son of Azbuk, the ruler of the half part of Beth Zur, unto the place over against the sepulchres of David, unto the pool that was made, and unto the house of the mighty. Now, when he says the sepulchres of David, it's not just David, but it's also his descendants. It's the royal thing. So after him repaired Nehemiah, the son of Azbuk. There's several Nehemiahs. Be careful. They're not all the same as Nehemiah. But anyway, the ruler of the half part of Beth Zur, unto the place over and against the sepulchres of David. That's the royal of the royal family. And the pool was made and unto the house of the mighty. House of the mighty is a place we assume is somehow linked, if you will, to the mighty men, the barracks, if you will, of David's elite corps, his mighty men, as it's called in 2 Samuel 23 and elsewhere. And after him repaired the Levites, Rehum the son of Bani. Next to him repaired Hashabiah, the ruler of the half part of Keilah, which is a town in his part. And after him repaired their brethren, Bevi the son of Henadad, the ruler of the half part of Keilah. And next to him repaired the Ezer, the son of Jeshua, or Joshua if you want. the ruler of Mizpah, another piece over and against going up to the armory at the turning of the wall. And after him Baruch the son of Zabbai earnestly repaired the other piece from the turning of the wall unto the door of the house of Eliashib the high priest. So we have Nehemiah recording the details of the execution of his plan. They rebuilt the wall in 52 days, which is really an astonishing thing. Now understand, they didn't build it from scratch. They're really repairing a wall that had been damaged 70 years earlier when Nebuchadnezzar's attack. But still, that's a very ambitious project, especially when you realize they're doing this under adverse conditions, which we'll talk about in a little bit. After him repaired Meremoth the son of Urijah, the son of Koz, another piece from the door of the house of Eliashib, even at the end of the house of Eliashib. And after him repaired the priests, the men of the plain. After him repaired Benjamin and Hashab over against their house. And after him repaired Azariah, the son of Messiah, the son of Ananiah, by his house. And after him repaired Benui, the son of Henadad, another piece from the house of Azariah unto the turning of the wall, even unto the corner. And Palal, the son of Uzziah, over and against the turning of the wall, the tower which lieth out from the king's high house, which was by the court of the prison. And after him, Pedaiah, the son of Parash. And moreover, the Nethinims. Now remember, the Nethinims, we think, was a current term for what used to be the Gibeonites that made the deal with Joshua and then became their servants. You may recall from the book of Joshua. We think that that's what we're dealing with here, because they're obviously subjected people that are really acting in service, but nevertheless glad to do so. So, moreover, the Nethinims dwelt in Ophel unto the place over and against the water gate toward the east, and the tower that lieth out. And after them the Tekoites repaired another piece over and against the great tower that lieth out, even unto the wall of Ophel, and from above the horse gate repaired the priests, every one over and against his house. So, this is again so that, brings you almost all the way around, in effect. And after them, Zadok the son of Immer over against his house, and after him repaired Shemaiah the son of Shechaniah, the keeper of the east gate. After him repaired Hananiah the son of Shelemiah, and Hanun the sixth son of Zalaph, another piece. And after him repaired Meshullam the son of Berechiah over against his chamber. Any questions so far? You're getting all this, are you? Okay. Now, if you're asking me what's the spiritual value of this, you're probably as equipped as I am to try to understand it here. Basically, obviously, we don't have equity, I think, in trying to understand all the families and the details, except to recognize this is a very detailed plan under very adverse conditions, and everybody had their sleeves rolled up participating in this project. Verse 31, after him repaired Malachiah the goldsmith's son unto the place of the Nethinims and of the merchants over and against the gate, Mifgad, and the going up of the corner. And between the going up of the corner into the sheep gate, repaired the goldsmiths and the merchants. And so ends this detailed chronicle of the work assignments. We have all kinds of details I can bore you with regards to the private houses that were all mentioned, that were houses of the priests and so forth, and also houses mentioned, including the priests' house, the other priests' houses. The horse gate on the east wall may have been where the horses entered the palace area, but that's speculation. There's all kinds of commentators all have sort of speculations, but they're guessing because it's not clear. Even this room that's mentioned in verse 32, going to the corner of the sheep gate, it's a room above the corner of the room on the wall. The purpose, we don't know what it's for. And of course, the sheep gate brings us back to where we started, basically. So that brings us to Nehemiah chapter 4. Now, you'd get the impression from chapter 3 that Nehemiah signed all these things and everything went very smoothly. It's a summary. Did things go smoothly? No, not so. God's work rarely goes forward without opposition. So part of what we're going to be starting to recap here is some of the environments. That was sort of a forward look of what was accomplished by whom. But it ignores what's about to be evident, namely the oppression that they're getting. Anyone that doesn't believe in Satan should just try opposing him for a while. And that will take care of itself. But anyway, we're in Nehemiah chapter 4, and we are going to jump into verse 1. It came to pass that when Sanballat heard that we builded the wall, notice the we, see Nehemiah is this first person, that we builded the wall, he was wroth and took great indignation and mocked the Jews. Now, I'll come back to the word Jews here in a minute, but let's just finish with verse 2 here. And he spake before his brethren and the army of Samaria and said, what do these feeble Jews? Will they fortify themselves? Will they sacrifice? Will they make an end in a day? Will they revive the stones out of the heaps of the rubbish which are burned? Bear in mind, the rubbish is also charred, because it wasn't just torn down, it was burned, the place. But Sanballat, of course, doesn't understand that they have the authority from the king. That's something that isn't clear to him yet. And he's mocking them. These feeble Jews, what are they going to do? They're going to fortify themselves? Or they think they're going to be independent? And will they sacrifice? That doesn't turn them on. Will they make an end in a day? No, it'll be about 52 days, so that'll be a surprise. And will they revive the stones out of the heaps and so forth? A couple of things I want to talk about before we go on. I want you to notice all through Ezra and Nehemiah, there's a subtle insight that I'd like you to satisfy yourself through your own study is correct. You notice in verse 1 he speaks that he mocked the Jews. And I just want to clear up some. You hear people try to make a distinction between the Jews and the Israelites. They build this on the idea that the northern kingdom was conquered by Assyria back in a couple of centuries earlier, and the southern kingdom went into captivity. It was the house of Judah. And they try to argue that the word Jews is restricted to the southern kingdom, the house of Judah, which includes Benjamin, by the way. Okay, and this all gets sort of mangled up with this theory that there's 10 lost tribes. That's colorful. It's in the literature, not in the biblical literature. It's not biblical. I want to show you why. After the Babylonian captivity, if you study your Bible, you'll discover the terms Jew and Israelite are used interchangeably. Linguistically, they echo the north and south kingdoms, I suppose, but they're used interchangeably by almost everybody. Ezra calls the returning remnant that comes back under his thing the Jews 8 times. He calls them Israel 40 times, interchangeably. He also calls them all Israel in at least 4 or 5 places. So this idea that there's 10 lost tribes is not known to Ezra. He's not aware of that. Nehemiah also speaks of the Jews 11 times and Israel 22 times, interchangeably. He speaks in chapter 12, he's going to make the point that all Israel is back in the land. That is, representatives of all the tribes are among them. And partly because when they split up, back under Jeroboam the first, the faithful migrated south and commingled with the house of Judah. To the south were those that were faithful to the temple worship, of all tribes. Don't confuse the genealogy of the tribe with the geography that was assigned to them under Joshua. They're different issues. You see, just as I might say you're a Californian because you live in California, or you could be a Californian because your genealogy is associated. Of course, we don't assign the land by genealogy, but you get in other words, the term can be ambiguous. If you say Ephraim, you may mean the geography, or it's also an idiom used for the northern kingdom. It doesn't mean that everybody up there was of the tribe of Ephraim, as an example. But let's move on. Malachi closes the Old Testament, speaks of the remnant as the nation, all through his book, his prophecies. Let's go to the New Testament. Remember Anna in Luke 2? She knew her tribal identity was of the tribe of Asher. These people knew what their linkages were. Paul, he knew he was of the tribe of Benjamin, which would be considered a Jew because he's in the southern kingdom. But in Romans 11:1, he's also calls himself an Israelite, both. In the New Testament, the word Israel is used 75 times, the word Jew 174 times, and again interchangeably. And the Feast of Pentecost, Acts chapter 2, Peter cries in Acts chapter 2, verse 14, "Ye men of Judea." And a few verses later, "Ye men of Israel." He's not causing a distinction, he's using the synonyms. And he finishes a few verses later speaking to all the house of Israel. And by the way, so does James and Peter and so forth. So this distinction. The reason I emphasize this, it causes confusion. People build theories on a presumed distinction here, and I can tell you, one reason it's dangerous, you'll discover that most anti-Semitic literature leans heavily on this. So it seems like it's just some innocent definition issues. It's more dangerous than that. And if you get into that, I won't take the time here to chase all those things down. Just all I want to do is sensitize you to the issue. And if someone starts making a distinction between Jew and Israelite, be cautious. Because I'm going to suggest to you that it's not biblical, but I want you to do your own study and come to your own conclusions. But also recognize that it can lead to some strange heresies. Not in and of itself. It seems to be a foundation of quicksand to build on. So let's move on. Okay, in verse 3. Now Tobiah the Ammonite. We're going to hear a lot about him later. He becomes there's a major lesson we're going to learn through some of his antics. But anyway, Tobiah the Ammonite was by him, and he said, even that which they build, if a fox go up, he shall break down their stone wall. In other words, their wall is so feeble, a fox, which you know is a very agile but very small animal, that it would knock it down. That's his epithet, if you will. Hear, O our God, for we are despised, and turn our reproach upon their own head, and give for a prey in the land of captivity. And cover not their iniquity, and let not their sin be blotted out from before thee, for they have provoked thee to anger before the builders. Sanballat, as we said earlier, in the earlier few verses, was displeased. We ran into him in chapter 2, you may recall, because he was upset when Nehemiah first returned. And of course, his displeasure turns to anger here, and so Tobiah is one of his associates. So it's in the presence of the Samaritan soldiers that he ridicules the Jews. And he is accusing them of rebelling against King Artaxerxes. He's even going to send a letter to the king that Nehemiah, in his strength of faith, ignores. And we'll come to that. As you get to understand Nehemiah, you get to be very impressed. He's quite a leader. He's strong, got real backbone, and he also is an example for us to follow because he prays at every turn. And so anyway... Now, verses 4 and 5 are a prayer, of course, and Nehemiah, that's a distinct part and consistent part of him solving problems. If you've got problems, the first thing you ought to do is pray about it. We tend to do it as a last resort. I don't know why that is. It's an indictment of our personal walk, if that's true, and I think it is true for many of us. No, it should be a very consistent part and probably your first step in problem solving. And so we'll see when Nehemiah is faced with this demoralizing attack by Sanballat and his guys, he asks for God. Oh, hear us, O God, for we are despised. And so he asked God to deal with them as they deserve. Something you discuss on the way home. Should Christians pray like this? Calling down punishment on your enemies? I'll let you chew on that as you drive home. You can talk about that. But you should understand here, Sanballat in opposing them was opposing God. That puts him in a little different category. And God had already pronounced judgment against Nehemiah's enemies, or Israel's enemies. And so Nehemiah is really re-articulating God's previously expressed will. So that should color your judgment here. So he's basically praying that God would bring about that which he promised Abraham that he would do for his covenant people. And I think the main thing we all should agree on without controversy is that vengeance belongs to God, not to Nehemiah or other believers. And your references there are Deuteronomy 32:35 and Romans 12:19 for those of you building your notebooks. Let's move on to verse 6. So built we the wall. And all the wall was joined together unto the half thereof, for the people had a mind to work. Isn't that a great thing to hear? See, after praying, Nehemiah kept working. We often pray and then they stand back and expect God to do it for us. We've given him his task list and we stand back to see if he executes it properly. No, that's not the way Nehemiah did it. Nehemiah always blends the subjection to the will of God with his human effort. So he faces Sanballat's opposition with both prayer and hard work. And once he commits the problem to the Lord, he trusts God to help them achieve their goal, but he keeps working. So they built the wall to half their height. That's really the progress report at this point. So Sanballat and Tobiah's attempts to demoralize the people, that had failed, but they're not through yet. The Jews rose above their attempts at discouragement and went ahead and work diligently and enthusiastically. The word enthusiastically, you know what that means? The word is theos, God, is to be imbued with God. The root word, the linguistics of enthusiasm, is to be imbued into you, the Spirit of God. Interesting. We use it more broadly, but that's interesting where the root comes from. And so anyway, they completed what they did in a short time. And so he's going to, in chapter 6, tell us that they finished the entire thing in 52 days, about 8 weeks of 6 days each. So this is probably about the halfway point. And as Ben Franklin might summarize, well begun is half done, isn't it? Huh? But it came to pass when Sanballat and Tobiah, the Arabians, the Arabs were there, and the Ammonites and the Ashdodites heard the walls of Jerusalem were made up, and that the breaches begun to be stopped, then they were very wroth. So the enemies are starting to get angry here. It's getting nastier and nastier. And conspired all of them together to come and to fight against Jerusalem and to hinder it. Has anything changed? Has anything changed? If you look at the whole history of the world, you know, if you study the United Nations, since its inception, it has passed several hundred resolutions. About 300, one case 400. Anyway, both the General Assembly and the Security Council. What's interesting, if you study those over the 40 years, what is it, 1945 to today, it's more than 40, 50 years, over 50 years. Almost 60 years. Do you realize that about 60% of the resolutions of the Security Council and about the same percentage of all the resolutions of the General Assembly are about Israel and always against it? The first shock is that they spend that much time on Israel. You know, the world has other problems. That may come as a surprise to some people, but, you know. But to realize, you need to understand that, to understand why Israel does not get excited when the people advocate that UN inspectors come in to straighten things out. And I always get a kick about it in Israel. They have UN soldiers that don't carry weapons. They call them the unsoldiers. What's also funny is that they built their headquarters on a hill. There was some property available, the UN did. And they didn't realize, they hadn't done their homework in the Old Testament, because that hill was known in the days of Saul as the Hill of Evil Counsel. We're off the subject. Let's get back. I'm sorry about that. Anyway, the enemies are now going to start fighting, not just discouraged, but they're going to come and fight. And so, nevertheless, we made our prayer. This is all first person from Nehemiah. Nevertheless, we made our prayer unto God and set a watch against them day and night because of them. So see, I love it. They pray, but then they roll up their sleeves. I like that. And nevertheless, we made our prayer unto God and set a watch against them day and night because of them. So the progress report is stirred up more trouble here. Joining Sanballat and the Samaritans from the north, Tobiah and the Ammonites from the east, Geshem and the Arabs from the south. There were also men from Ashdod, the Philistine city, to the west. So they're going to draw adversaries from all corners here. Now, the corporate strategy of Judah's enemies was met by a corporate response on the part of Judah. And so they pray for help. Now, the advantage, of course, that the Jews have is that God is in the middle of what they're doing. And they post around the clock watch to keep an eye on things. And Judah said, the strength of the bearers of the burdens is decayed, and there is much rubbish, so that we are not able to build the wall. So they're getting a little discouraged here because they got a huge thing ahead of them here. And our adversaries said, they shall not know, neither see, till we come in the midst among them and slay them and cause the work to cease. And it came to pass that when the Jews which dwelt by them came, they said unto us 10 times, from all the places whence ye shall return unto us, they will be upon you. And so see, even though they prayed, the problem hasn't been automatically solved. The builders face some new problems. They're physically and psychologically exhausted because the work seems endless. They're only halfway through. So now they face the threat of a secret attack. And Nehemiah knew this was not idle talk. It's been confirmed enough that Nehemiah realizes this is all for real. So Verse 13, therefore set I in the lower places behind the wall, even on higher places, I even set the people after their families with their swords, their spears, and their bows. And I looked and rose up and said unto the nobles, and to the rulers, and to the rest of the people, be not ye afraid of them. Remember the Lord, which is great and terrible, and fight for your brethren, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your houses. You get the impression that Nehemiah is not only a strong leader, spiritually rooted, but you get the impression he's also a pretty articulate guy. He knew how to communicate to them. In verse 15, it came to pass when our enemies heard that it was known unto us, and that God had brought their counsel to naught, that we returned all of us to the wall, every one unto his work. And it came to pass that from that time forth, that half of my servants wrought in the work, and the other half of them held both the spears, the shields, and the bows, and the habergeons. The rulers were behind all the house of Judah. So half of them were working, half of them were guarding. And so they got whole families together, of course, and that put a lot of pressure on the fathers, can you imagine? And but it's also shrewd because if in case of attack, they had no choice but to fight, see? And he knew if it's the only decision you can make if you're going to survive and succeed in rebuilding the walls. But they had this crippling fear. It's a very real issue. They which builded on the wall, and they that bear burdens, with those that laded, every one with one of his hands wrought in the work, and with the other hand held a weapon. And for the builders, every one had his sword girded by his side, and so builded. And he that sounded the trumpet was by me. It's we got them split half and half, and it's interesting that I don't know how you lay bricks while you're holding a weapon, but obviously they had their wits about us and kept at it. Verse 19, and I said to the nobles and to the rulers and to the rest of the people, the work is great and large, and we are separated upon the wall, one far from another. In what place therefore ye hear the sound of the trumpet, resort ye hither unto us. Our God shall fight for us. So we labored in the work, and half of them held the spears from the rising of the morning until the stars appeared. Likewise, at the same time said I unto the people, let every one with his servant lodge within Jerusalem, that in the night they may be a guard to us and labor on the day. So neither I nor my brethren nor my servants nor the men of the guard which followed me, none of us put off our clothes, saving that every one put them off for washing. That's reassuring. Okay. So they're obviously trying to minimize their vulnerability. Diligent walks all the time. So let's get to chapter 5. There was a great cry of the people and of their wives against the brethren, the Jews. We've been talking so far about the external problems. In chapter 5, we're in touch about the internal problems. Some people feel that the events of chapter 5 happened after the wall was completed by calling an assembly and so forth. But from verse 16, we think that the wall work is continuing. So without getting into that controversy, which is not a big deal, let's move on. There was a great cry of the people and of their wives against their brethren, the Jews. This is internal stuff now. They got squabbles among themselves. For there were that said, we our sons and our daughters are many. Therefore we take up corn for them that we may eat and live. Some also there were that said, we have mortgaged our lands, our vineyards, our houses, that we might buy corn because of the dearth. And there were also those that said, we have borrowed money for the king's tribute, and that upon our lands and vineyards. Yet now our flesh is as the flesh of our brethren, our children as their children, and lo, we bring into bondage our sons and our daughters to be servants, and some of our daughters are brought into bondage already. Neither is it in our power to redeem them, for other men have our lands and vineyards. So now, see, Nehemiah's challenge as a spiritual leader up till now is focused on the forces outside of Judah. Now the walls are they're not finished rebuilt yet, and already he's encountering the most intense kind of problem that any spiritual leader has to face, and that's problems from within. And now for these, the problems did not center in Sanballat or Tobiah or Geshem or those people. And there are at least 4 such difficulties. They had a food shortage as first part. They had to get grain for food to keep themselves and their families alive. And the work on the wall, of course, hindered them from tending their crops. And so this crop failure was called a famine, actually. And another thing, others had grain, they were buying it from others, but they had to mortgage everything. They had to do that, getting themselves in debt. Others, not wanting to mortgage their property, borrowed money from their Jewish brothers to pay the property taxes to King Artaxerxes. And this is compounded by the fact they're charged exorbitant interest rates by their own Jewish brothers. So in other words, you could borrow, but their Jewish brothers were charging exorbitant interest, and Nehemiah was going to deal with that forthcoming. And of course, they had to, in order to pay, also to pay their creditors, they had to mortgage their children into slavery, which was one of the ways they dealt with those issues. So this is all double trouble for Nehemiah. So he's got external enemies on the one as a constant threat, and now we've got Jews taking advantage of Jews inside the walls. So now it's another plunge of discouragement forthcoming. And I was very angry when I heard their cry with these words. Boy, I can imagine. Then I consulted with myself. I got to try that sometime. I used to do that, but I couldn't stand the arguments. No, seriously. And I consulted with myself, and I rebuked the nobles, the rulers, and said unto them, Ye exact usury, every one of his brother. And I set a great assembly against them. And I said unto them, We, after our ability, have redeemed our brethren the Jews, which were sold unto the heathen. Will ye even sell your brethren? Shall they be sold unto us? Then held they their peace, and found nothing to answer. And I said, It is not good that ye do. Ought ye not to walk in the fear of our God because of the reproach of the heathen, our enemies? You know, that's a principle we need to keep in mind. We need to, moment by moment, step by step, walk in the fear of God and recognize that part of what we do can cause the enemies of God to blaspheme. And when we're unforgiving, or when we handle some situation in a fleshly way, not only is it bad witness in a primary sense, it also can cause the enemies of God to blaspheme. And that's a frightening issue. Well, you know, Nehemiah, after he regains his equilibrium, he does what Nehemiah does. He hits them head on. He rebukes those that were violating God's command, not to charge their own people interest. And that's consistent with Exodus 22, Leviticus 25, Deuteronomy 23. Money could be loaned out, but not to gain interest from another person's distresses. And then he called a large meeting, and he points out the inconsistencies of their behavior compared to what he and others in exile had done personally to help their brothers. What's going to emerge here is some of the sacrifices that Nehemiah has not taken advantage of his position. You know, stop and think about this guy. He was the right hand to the king of Persia, which ruled the whole known world at that time. And he gave that up to fight over this little piece of ground. You have to understand the sacrifice he's already made. And Nehemiah and others had purchased indentured Jews that were sold to foreigners. That's all covered in Leviticus 25, by the way. But see, now the opposite was happening. Jews were selling their own Jews into slavery. And part of the dynamic here is God's reputation is at stake. That's one of the disturbing things to realize, that when the way we act, the way we teach, the theories that we espouse, you want to be careful that you never impugn the character of God. Anytime you imply that God isn't merciful, you may be impugning his character. There are a number of doctrines that are prevalent around on the landscape, and if you examine them closely, one of the terrifying things is they impugn the character of God. That's a scary place to be. Scary place to be. Part of Nehemiah's concern here is that this immoral and unethical behavior is bringing reproach on the very one that had delivered their country from both the Egyptian bondage and from the Babylonian bondage. So he's exhorting them to fear and the love of God. That's trust, obey, and serve him. And let's move on. Verse 10. I likewise and my brethren and my servants might exact of them money and corn. I pray you, let us leave off this usury. Restore, I pray you, to them, even this day, their lands, their vineyards, their olive yards, and their houses, and also the 100th part of the money, of the corn, the wine, and the oil that ye exacted. And the 100th part, that's 1% per month. 1%. Didn't know they had credit cards in those days, did you? Yeah, same deal. Same deal. And and Nehemiah is not only asking him to do this, he's underscoring the urgency. Do it now. Then said they, we will restore them, we will require nothing of them, so will we do as thou sayest. And then I called the priests and took an oath of them that they should do according to this promise. Obviously that pleased Nehemiah, I'm sure, but he knew that words are cheap, so he puts them under an oath. And very clever. So I took my lap and said, go, God shake. So, and by the way, talk about this lap thing for a minute. What he's doing, he's shaking out the folds of his robe. That's like sort of emptying your pockets in a sense. And what he's doing is to symbolize that God will shake out of his house every person who failed to keep his oath. This gesture sort of, it shook my lap. It's sort of like brushing the dust off your shoes is the equivalent kind of thing. He shook my lap and said, so God shake out every man from his house and from his labor that performeth not this promise, even thus be shaken out and emptied. And all the congregation said, amen, and praised the Lord. The people did according to this promise. Nehemiah embodies their commitment into an oath, in effect, by this gesture. And because that put them under an obligation before the Lord. And the priests, of course, witnessed this oath-taking. It'll come up later. You should understand, Nehemiah was appointed governor of Judah. That's the highest position of leadership in the nation at that time. Now, what he's going to do from verse 14 on, it's this, most scholars think in his historical account of his years in Jerusalem, he inserted the observations from verse 14 and 19 about his perspective from that leadership position. And he includes the verses here because they impact the narrative of what's going on. So, verse 14, moreover, from the time that I was appointed to be their governor in the land of Judah, from the 20th year even unto the 30th year of Artaxerxes the king, that is 12 years, I and my brethren have not eaten the bread of the governor. So he didn't take advantage of his position. See, one of the fringe benefits, you could call it, of being a governor is food allowances and granted to him by the Persian officials. And probably even for the official entertaining of guests. But he didn't take advantage of that. But the former governors that had been before me were chargeable unto the people and had taken of them bread and wine, besides 40 shekels of silver. Yea, even their servants bear rule over the people. But so did not I, because of the fear of God. Yea, also I continued in the work of this wall, and neither brought we any land, and all my servants were gathered thither unto the work. And you get a real insight in this guy. He's for real. He's serious about what he's doing. And now Nehemiah could have loaned them money to pay their taxes and used their land as a collateral. And when they could not pay back what they borrowed, he could apply it the world standard and take in their land. That's what Joseph did for Pharaoh back in those days. But he could have exploited the poor, but he didn't do that. He didn't do any acquisitions. He didn't do any outright purchases. He didn't abuse his position as governor in any way. In fact, now he didn't abuse it. He didn't even take advantage of it. He stayed himself squeaky clean. He was there to exemplify God's law and not violate it. That's really the net of this. He came to build a wall and not a personal empire. That's the summary, I think, of Nehemiah and how rare that sense of commitment is. Moreover, there were at my table 150 of the Jews and rulers beside those that came unto us from among the heathen that are about us. And now that which was prepared for me daily was 1 ox and 6 choice sheep. Also fowls were prepared for me, and once in 10 days store of all sorts of wine. Yet for all this required not I the bread of the governor, because the bondage was heavy upon this people. Think upon me, my God, for good according to all that I have done for these people. We don't quite know who these 150 were, by the way. Scholars speculate, but we really don't know. There are 7 prayers recorded in this book. Remember me with favor is the same prayer that he voices at the end of the book as we go. So ends. Let's just summarize again some thoughts before we tie off this chapter about Nehemiah's leadership. He established a reasonable, attainable goal. That was his first step. He did very carefully study that. He had a sense of mission that didn't get him distracted from anything. He was willing to get personally involved. He labored with them on the wall. He arranged his priorities in order to accomplish his goal. See, the mission focus is important. He patiently waited for God's timing. And he served that king for a long time, spent 4 months preparing before he even approached the king on for his issue. And he showed respect to his superior. Artaxerxes was a Gentile king, but he showed him respect. He prays at crucial times. Boy, that's one lesson we should certainly learn from Nehemiah. He prayed, I think, between clauses, He made his request with tact and graciousness to whomever he was speaking. He was well prepared and thought of his needs in advance. He wasn't caught by surprise. Each step had evidence that he prepared. He did his homework. He went through the proper channels. He took time, 3 days, to rest, pray, and plan before he even let his plan be known to the people he was going to work with. He investigated the situation firsthand. Didn't trust he personally made the inspection in the middle of the night. And he informed others only after he knew the size of the problem. He scoped it first. He identified himself as one with the people. He wasn't aloof, he was part of them. He set before them the reasonable attainable goal. He assured them that God was in the project. Boy, that's important. It's important to know that, important to make that the basis. But he displayed self-confidence in facing obstacles, and that's the way it was listed in the list, but I wouldn't call it self-confidence, I'd call it God-confidence. But the point is he went with strength of assurance. He displayed God's confidence in facing obstacles. That's, I guess, the way of amplifying that. And he did not argue with his opponents. He was not discouraged by the opposition. And he courageously used the authority of his position. This is the list that's often quoted by Donald Campbell in his book, Nehemiah, the Man in Charge, a book on leadership, lessons from Nehemiah.